Hello and welcome to Cowes on the Isle of Wight for the world's biggest festival of speed on the water. We're celebrating the Cowes Classic. It's to offshore powerboating what Wimbledon is to tennis. Founded by newspaper magnate Sir Max Aitken 40 years ago, Cowes soon became the cradle of offshore powerboat racing. This year, over 130 state-of-the-art machines, some capable of speeds of over 100 miles per hour, are taking part in the event. How different it all was back in 1961 when the first race went from Cowes to Torquay.
Well, it started when Max Aitken went out to the Bahamas and met with a man called Sam Griffiths and ran in the Miami-Nassau race.
At the time, there were very few boats, proper race boats, around in Europe, and people were really racing cruisers with numbers on.
Max Aitken's idea when he started the race was to provide a competitive event for boats which could actually be used. And in the rules, you had to have a cabin space of so many square feet, cubic feet, or whatever.
It's to improve the breed of powerboats, or motorboats really, what they were in those days, make them more reliable, more seaworthy and stronger. And I think that worked. His ambitions were certainly achieved.
Max Aitken already had many ties in Cowes on the Isle of Wight, but his dilemma was where to finish the race. He arrived at a comfortable domestic solution.
We had a holiday house down near Torquay, a place called Shoulden, and I think when my father wanted to create this race, which after all became like the grand national of powerboat races, he said, I know, it'll save me a trip, let's do it to Torquay.
And so a classic was born. It captured the imagination and harnessed the same zeal among daring speedsters that motor racing must have done decades before.
Two Americans came over, Sam Griffiths and Jim Wynn, who actually knew what they were doing, which none of us did. But Sam, who had a 31-foot Bertram, broke down before he left the Solent. So that gave the rest of us a sporting chance. And I thought it was sort of mountainous seas, but I guess actually it was about force 5. And we all learnt a lot, but it took a long time. It took me 7 hours and 20 minutes to get to Torquay. But the only saving grace was it took everyone else a bit longer.
I remember the first race, I was on the finish boat in Torquay, which was Dad's sailing boat called Drumbeat. And they put us on at 11 o'clock in the morning, thinking that these boats are going to be very swift. I think we started here at 10 o'clock. First finisher was at 4:30 in the afternoon.
In those days, we were able to take off our helmets once we left the Solent, have our suitcase in the cabin, stop in Torquay and put on the black tie for a nice dinner, and then when the hangover dictated the next morning, you were timed over the line back for the Bollinger Trophy, and the big prize getting back here.
In 1968, for the first time, the race officially went from Cowes to Torquay and back to Cowes again, 228 miles, a marathon conducted as a sprint.
Last year's winner, the Gardner brothers Sir Fury, Telstar, Bill Shand's Kids Ultimatum, and Delta. And Ultimatum takes an early lead. Delta is crewed by the young Gardner cousins, sons of the brothers Charles and Jimmy aboard Sir Fury. And Tim Powell and Norman Barkley have rally driver Paddy Hopkirk aboard their Ufer. And here's J.R. Kennelly's Maltese Magnum fighting to get into the leading bunch ahead of Ted Greenall's Jeep. On the return leg from Southsea, Sir Fury and Magnum Tornado have burst out into a clear lead on the pack. The Italian-American partnership in Magnum versus the British crewed and built Sir Fury. The Gardner brothers, a remarkable combination and last year's winners, accepting this instant challenge from Magnum and prepared to dispute every yard of the 198-mile course. The younger Gardners in Delta keep the family flag flying and are third. Tommy Sopwith with Telstar is fourth. And as the rough water predicted by the forecast becomes a certainty, it's clear that sheer speed alone will not win this race. The sea-keeping capabilities of the boat, the strength of its structure, and the skill and courage of the crew are what matter when the water gets lumpy. Already there have been 13 retirements from the 55 who started, and sad to say, Lady Violet Aitken is not to be with her husband this time amongst the finishers. On to Portland Bill. and the sea is running big and breaking. But incredible as it seemed, Sir Fury and Magnum Tornado were still within spray-throwing distance of each other.
We'll continue the story of the first cows, Torquay cows, a little later. Sir Max Aitken had hoped his race would lead to a new breed of stronger, faster and more reliable powerboats. And so it proved with rapid development.
The first major breakthrough was by an American called Jim Wynne, who developed the out-drive. Immediately boats fitted with that equipment went about 10 miles faster than a conventional shaft-driven propeller. And I think the next breakthrough then was really the catamarans, another 10 years later. And the catamarans went at least 10 miles faster, if not 20. Their only downside being if it was anything over sort of 4.6, then a monohull could still outrun a catamaran. And then, of course, the machinery, the power of the machinery has gone up, horsepower's increased, and the big Class 1 boats now can run in excess of 150 miles an hour. The Class 2 boats, something around 135 miles an hour. So those were speeds that one never even thought of, even in flat water.
Since this is a special anniversary, winners from the past 4 decades have flown in from Europe and America. They're here to share in the excitement and also reminisce a bit about the good times past.
In Torquay, we got the shark and put it inside the swimming pool at the Imperial Hotel. And this old boy, this is late at night, of course, and we'd had a few, came down for his early morning swim the following morning, and this fin is going through he jumped in, had a heart problem when he saw it. They panicked, called the vet. The vet shot this shark in the Imperial. Then the pool had to be drained. I've never had such a big hotel bill in my life, mate.
You could enter a family cruising boat, soup up the engines a bit and go racing. And those days sadly are gone.
We were the last of the enthusiastic amateurs.
There were a lot of Americans coming there, a lot of Italians with their big boats, and they all came to cows. I think it was Don Aronow who said, if you haven't won cows, you're not the world champion.
It is the race, really. It's the one that everybody wants to win.
If you are a powerboat racer and you have not won cows, you miss something, and this is very important.
It is the most difficult race to win. It's the longest, it's the toughest, it's the most changeable, anything can happen, and not a lot of people have won it.
It's such a long race, attrition is very high, navigation is very important, and keeping the kit together is the most important thing.
The engines, they were very, very powerful, but they're actually only motor car engines, so they were truck engines even. And they were as delicate as an egg, and you're expecting them to run for 200 miles flat out.
Never one's to throttle back and play it safe unless absolutely necessary. Charles Gill and his crew made quite an impression during the 1970s. His boats, I Like It and I Like It Too, liked cows very much.
I used to drive it and throttle it, and Jim used to tow it, and John used to navigate when we let him speak. And in the years we were powerboat racing, we took part in 4 cows to Torquay and back again. We won the last one of those races that was ever held and broke the speed record as well in 1976. The world champion, a chap called Tom Gentry, came over here that year, and he was expected to win, understandably, but unfortunately there were 2 world championship races, one the Needles race and one the Cows Torquay, and we beat him both times.
Twice, yeah. Unlike other races, you have to go through quite a number of different sea states, as well as the length of the race itself. So in the Solent, you can get a very nasty Solent chop, which is one sort of sea state. You then go down the Needles Channel and you get huge stand-up waves, very, very difficult for a powerboat. And then on the way down to Torquay, you get Anvil, St Albans and Falkland tide races, which are very confused, nasty seas.
You have shoaling water, you have wind against tide. I myself have been upside down in a boat, but I have to say that was nearly as scary as the time here at Cowes when the waves were up 15, 20 feet high coming through the Needles, and you're just sitting down there 2 feet off the water, and you just have to remind yourself that the boat will float and you will get through these things.
A powerboat goes quickest in smooth water. So the quickest way to is the smooth water route. And by working out the tide, you could work out where the tide races and the bad waves were going to be, and therefore how to go around them, and work out the quickest way to Torquay.
And in our featured race in 1968, that's exactly what Tommy Sopwith did to outfox his rivals.
Choosing an inshore course to follow the coastline, they gambled on their ability to dodge the heavy head seas and thereby make up for the extra distance they set themselves in their passage round rather than across Line Bay. Telstar shot into the shelter of Torbay, almost unable to believe that their ruse had worked so well.
Sopwith proved that cunning and guile can be just as important as size and horsepower. In a smaller boat with a single engine, the winner of the first Cowes Torquay celebrated another famous victory. Precise navigation is critical, of course, and nowadays a host of electronic aids such as chart plotters and GPS can be used. How times have changed.
In the early days, you know, it was a compass and a watch, and it was all done by preparation. You did it all beforehand, you had it up in your head, you had a chart in front of you, and you needed both hands to hold on tightly, so you could do nothing with your hands at all. You know, the solution is concentration, because if you're doing 2 miles a minute, things happen very fast, very, very fast.
And you go from buoy to mark to buoy to mark, and to Torquay, and Torquay, yeah, and the various marks literally appear out of the mist.
Well, there's nothing like going across Line Bay and just finding the right mark spot on. And as a navigator, it gives you quite a kind of sense of satisfaction.
You get remembered for the ones you get wrong, not the ones you get right. It's a bit like being a goalkeeper. If you save everything, nobody notices. If you make a mistake and let one through, it's all your fault.
Foreign drivers preferred British navigators at Cowes, but they weren't allowed to get cocky. Not on Bootsy's boat, anyway.
He'll go along to see a fishing boat, go alongside a fishing boat, and stop and ask them the way. Just to really upset me.
Fishermen are very good navigators, and that makes, of course, make that to become crazy.
In 1978, a second-string boat from the United States with British navigator Mike Mantle took Cowes by storm, shattering the long-established League of Gentlemen Winners. Behind the wheel was no ordinary upstart. She was a Californian grandmother named Betty Cook. While she enjoyed the victory champagne, the bubbles must have got up the noses of many of the pre-race favourites. Welcome back to Cowes on the Isle of Wight. We're celebrating the 40th anniversary of the world's most famous offshore powerboat race, the Cowes Classic. No fewer than 5 European titles were up for grabs. No Class 1, but every other shape, size and design of powerboat battled it out in the choppy waters of the Solent and around the Isle of Wight. In Class 2, the Scandinavian pairing of Stefan Roth and Jan Hilstad triumphed in Jotun, which had been flown in from California. Hampshire brothers David and Chris Allenby, the reigning Class 2 world champions, had to settle for the runners-up prize, almost losing it completely. Such was the conditions around the back of the island shore. The racing wasn't without further incident. Chasing a national title, driver Ian Sanderson with navigator Paul Scott ploughed into the green stuff, the boat nearly breaking in two. Luckily, both men suffered nothing more than concussion and bruising. Former world motor racing champion Damon Hill made his powerboating debut, finishing 6th out of 9 in the Honda series with star throttleman Steve Curtis.
And after about 3 or 4 laps, we really got it together and we started to come up through the pack. And I think, you know, doing a few more laps would have got a few more positions, but it was really good fun.
Well, he's brave man than I am, that's for sure, because I definitely wouldn't, I don't like being a passenger, and he took it very well. He kept on saying, keep your foot down.
But I don't think it's exactly true what he says. I was shouting all the time, but the intercom broke, and he thought I was saying faster, and I think I was saying slower.
More nostalgia now, and as the Cowes race grew in profile and stature, it attracted some colourful characters, to say the least.
Well, there was a mad Indian called Dr. Emil Sabundra,
who had an extraordinary boat built, which actually used 4 Jaguar engines, but it had a number of steering problems, and on one occasion it went over the top of a spectator boat. Fortunately, nobody was injured. And on another occasion, he lost control of the boat, and it went between the needles and ended up on the Needle Rock. So he wasn't a very successful offshore racer.
Neither was another, Lord Lucan. He entered the race in 1963 and promptly sunk. Not without trace, of course. How different the story would be 11 years later.
This race in 40 years, we're probably on average 70, 80 boats over the line. That's many hundreds of boats. We've only had 2 bad accidents, which is not a bad history or record.
But it's still a dangerous sport, and learning from bitter experience, powerboating has strived to reduce the risks as much as possible.
If you have a cockpit in the boat, you have to be strapped in. So we have a full safety harness system here. We have an air supply, so if you do turn typhoon, as I said before, this is it, the standard scuba kit, about 10 minutes air supply there, and you are trained in an escape routine, what they call a dunk test, an immersion test, where they turn you upside down in a tank of cold, dark water to prove you can escape from a situation like this. People who have had accidents of cockpits have all survived, whereas with speeds now, if you're in an open boat and you do turn typhoon, you are in some danger of hurting yourself.
The thumbs up from Steve Curtis. It later helped to save his life. The former world champion with driver Bjorn Gjelston were travelling at 145 miles per hour in Turkey when they flipped over and came to a sudden stop upside down. Both escaped by following that strict set of instructions they'd learnt in the dunk test. Powerboats are safer, and so are the events. In Cowes, rescue vessels nearly outnumber racing boats, and that's not all.
We've got paramedics in the air, on the water. We've obviously got HM Coast Guards, big helicopter in the event of somebody with a back injury or whatever. 93 boats, so there are a lot of people out there making sure that if there is problems, they are attended to very quickly indeed.
It's a fact of life. The bright and beautiful follow the rich and famous. Cowes has always been a magnet. Never one able to resist a pretty face, it almost cost Fabio Buzzi a race.
We went out from here with the winning boat. Everyone was expecting us to win. And the day before, there was a nice, pretty young journalist, and I was trying to explain her how was the conduction of the boat on board. I say, you see, here we have a lot of levers. You move this, you put the wing in, and with this one, you close the fuel. Then I left the fuel closed. So when we went out on the start, after 2 miles, one of the engines stopped. That after 2.5 miles, the second engine, and the third engine, and the fourth engine. So we stopped. Then I was watching the lever, it was closed. I opened the fuel again, pumped the diesel. We have lost, I would say, half an hour. Then we started racing like crazy, and we have won for a few seconds. And that was a terrific satisfaction, of course.
When we used to run the diesel boat, they had turbochargers on them. And we used to run them to the point where the turbochargers went transparent. They were so hot, you see. And I made him get in the back of the boat, out in the Solent here, looking at this turbocharger one day, and all of a sudden, and he took the end of his finger off in the turbocharger blade. And I wanted to keep on racing. And he'd gone as white as a sheet.
Well, I was laying on top of the engine. I was laying on top of the engine. And we're doing sort of 50-odd mile an hour, and there's blood all running down my arm. So he graciously let's stop and go back.
So, you know, I was a very hard taskmaster, you know.
We did used to have problems. I was saying to Charlie, I don't know if you remembered, at one time we actually made a mistake and put these steering cables on upside down in one race. And we done the Brighton race with him turning left, the wheel left, and the boat going right.
And cursing all the way.
You know, we definitely finished it, didn't we?
Yes, we did, yes.
Without the backing of Max Aitken's Daily Express, the Cowes Classic would never have got off the start line. But only later in its development did sponsorship of boats become commonplace, a sign of the times.
And certainly in the early days, sponsorship really didn't exist for the individual boats. In most cases, they didn't need it. It was really a sort of a gentleman's sport. And then they were able to afford to buy the boats to go racing. But nowadays, you know, the technology is so advanced and the equipment so expensive but you just can't afford to go racing without a sponsor.
That Cowes has lost its #1 status in recent years has less to do with sponsorship than with geography and an increasingly congested Solent.
Class 1 boats today are doing, what, something over 150 miles an hour. And I think if I was enjoying myself in my sailing boat and something approaching at 150 miles an hour, I would sort of think he ought to be in a different world.
There's nothing that would make me happier than seeing Class 1 boats and World Championship style of racing coming back here, but the speeds they're travelling now mean that it's probable that they'll not come back to Cowes unless we can have a change in the way we can marshal races.
The former champions who came to celebrate its 40th anniversary widely believe that the golden age ended with the passing of the Cowes Torquay Classic. The sport's moved on and up several gears, but today's racers owe a huge debt of gratitude to those early pioneers of their sport.